Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf chet of Baba of Makkot. We are now in the second chapter. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. First, I'll note that Ken was absolutely right yesterday that it was in Baba Basra that we saw that the Avir of Eretz Yisrael is makes one wise, Machkim, and it was but it was the very end of Bab Basra, Daf Kuf Nun Chet. And so that's why it felt at least somewhat relatively recent. But okay, so that was point number one that I wanted to highlight from yesterday. Again, the second point is that we began the second chapter of Makkot, which addresses situations where an accidental killer must go to a city of refuge. Today we pick up with the Mishnah at the bottom of Zion Mabet, and we discuss a wood chopper to review different ways that he could accidentally kill somebody. And a wood chopper makes a ton of sense for us to review because that's the case that the Chumash is talking about. In particular, the Torah says, the Pasuk says, this is Perek Yud Tet Pasuk Hey of Devarim. But Sher Yavo Esrei Ehu Vayar, that somebody comes to the forest with his friend, Lachtovetzim, to cut down, to cut wood. V'nidcha yado begarzan lichros ha'etz v'nashala barzel, and he takes the axe to cut the tree. V'nashal habarzel min ha'etz. Now those words, nashal habarzel min ha'etz, can mean two different things. That the nashal is to loosen, sort of, or slip. Habarzel min ha'etz could mean the metal slips off the handle of the axe, or it could mean v'nashal habarzel, that the metal chips off from the tree. So those are two possibilities. It could be that the axe head slips off, or the axe hits into the tree and a piece of wood shoots off. Umatzas rayehu, and whatever it is, it finds the person's friend. Ume and now he dies and kills him. Hu yanus el arim ha'ela v'chai. So he should run to one of the cities of refuge, and that will be how he will live. So those words, v'nashala barzel min ha'etz, are what we're going to be debating about in this Mishnah. So two possibilities. Nishmat habarzel mikito v'harag, if the metal comes off the handle. Rebbe Omer Eino Gola. Rebbe says that's not going to send somebody into Gullus, because that's not what the pasuk is talking about. That is more liable. That is well, it depends. You can view it both directions, but that's not going to send somebody into exile, either because it's more liable because the person should have checked the handle, or it's less liable because somebody, because that is so unlikely. Whereas the Chachamim say no, that's the case that the pasuk is talking about, and that's where one goes into Gullus. On the other hand, if it's from the tree that was being chopped that something comes off and kills somebody, Rebbe Omer Gola, that according to Rebbe is the understanding of the pasuk. And the Chachamim say no, that's not. Again, you can go in either direction, either saying that the Chachamim are saying that, well, you needed to check to see where you were chopping, and therefore where the wood was likely to go, and therefore it's not exiled because you're more responsible. Or we could say, I think it makes more sense to say less responsible. That on some level, if you don't check your equipment, so then that's where you go to Gullus according to Chachamim. Whereas Rebbe says if you don't check your equipment, that's almost like being irresponsible, and therefore we're not going to allow you to go to galus. And if, on the other hand, it's from the wood that's being chipped, Rebbe says, okay, well, that goes to exile because that's, you should, there's nothing you could do about it, etc. But you still should be more careful. And the Chachamim say, no, that's the case where it's so unlikely, and therefore that's not going to be the case where you go to exile. And it's all based on understanding those words of Nashel HaBarzel Min Ha'etz in the pasuk. So now the Gemara opens with a brisa that continues the conversation between Rebbe and the Chachamim, with Rebbe having a really, it's really only Rebbe that's going to talk in this brisa, but Rebbe has a great case. So Tanya, Amr lahem Rebbe l'Chachamim, Rebbe explains to the Chachamim, v'chi nemar v'nashal habarzel me'etzo, does it say that the iron slips off its wood, meaning that it would be the handle? V'alo lo nemar ela min ha'etz, it just says from the wood. So v'od nemar eitz lamata v'nemar eitz lamala. In that same pasuk, as we saw, references the word eitz twice. It says v'asher yavo esre'ehu v'yar lachtov eitzim. So it's clear from that you're trying to cut down trees. You're not trying to cut down handles, so you're trying to cut down trees. And so when eitzim means wood, it must be that the second time that it says eitz, and then the pasuk continues, and you take an axe in your hand in order to cut down wood. The word eitz appears 3 times, and the first 2 times it appears, it seems clear that it's referring to the trees and the wood. So shouldn't it also refer to the wood this time? So that's the case. So ma eitz ha'amar lamala mina eitz ha'mispakeya af eitz ha'ma'omer milmata mina eitz ha'mispakeya. We're talking about the wood that is being chopped. Okay. So Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi Amar Rav ushneim mikra echad darshu, and both of them are arguing about the meaning of one pasuk. V'nashal ha'barzel min ha'etz. Rebbe Savar Yesh Aim L'Masores, that the key meaning of the Nashal is based on how it's written, V'nishel Ksiv, and it's written V'nishel, as if you can say, read it as Nishel, and therefore it's referring to dislodging something. V'Rabbanan Savar Yesh Aim L'Mikra, V'nashal Karinan. We read the word Nashal, and therefore we're going to say that we're going to say that nashal means that the iron itself became dislodged. And so that's the basis for the argument. So for Rebbe Yesh Aim L'Masoris Svirale, 1 second, you're telling me that that Rebbe focuses on how something is written and that's key to it? I thought that he doesn't think that. Amar Rebbe Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rebbe Yochanan, we saw this statement previously as we turn to Chet Amud Aleph, we saw this
Sanhedrin around Daf Hey or Vav.
Yeah, well, if you take a look at the Masoras Hashas, top right corner of the daf, it notes that it's in Sanhedrin Dalet Amud Aleph. So very impressive that you were so close. And so Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rebbe Yehuda wrote 8. Ubeit Shammai, V'Rebbe Shimon, V'Rebbe Akiva, Kulos Viri, Lahu, Yesh Aim LaMikra. That when it comes to how we understand something, we focus on how it is pronounced. So how can Rav say that Rebbe's position, Rav, was said in the name of, that Rav Chia bar Ashi said it in the name of Rav. How can Rav maintain that Rebbe's position is based on the view that we focus on the way that it's written? So, Hainu Dekamar Lahuva Ode. No, the point is that's why Rebbe gave a second reason, right? Rebbe gave the first reason based on the Yesh Aim Limisores, and that we focus on Nishel, and so therefore the context of the wood being, that it should be slipping off its wood rather than the wood, and so as a result, it must be that the wood is being chipped, and so and then he says, and additionally, given the fact that the eitz is referring in all the situations as to the trees and the wood, so should the eitz of the handle. It shouldn't be understood as handle. It should be from the wood. And so that's why he gives a second reason, because the first reason is not consistent with his own philosophy. And so as a result, that's why he has to give two reasons. Amarav Papa, Mandishda Pisa Ludikla. If one throws Pisa could be either a bunch of stones or or clump of earth. So against a decal tree, v'atar tamre, and now that causes the dates to go v'azul tamre v'katel, and they go out and then they kill somebody. Banu l'machlokas to Rebbe v'Rabbanan. That's the same machlokas as Rebbe and the Rabbanan. Why is it the same machlokas? Because if we have what do we have in our Mishnah? Our Mishnah involves somebody chopping the wood. The wood then jumps out and goes and kills somebody. So it's not the initial force that kills somebody, but it's something that gets hit with that initial force that goes and kills somebody. And so the Rav Chachamim would say that you're not liable, like the second case in our Mishnah, and Rebbe would say that you are liable. And so that's the same machlokas in connection with somebody who throws something at a date tree and the date comes off and kills somebody. Well, Pshita.
That's I can't imagine dates killing people. They're small.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it flies into the person's mouth and chokes him.
Maybe I can understand. So does Tamar only refer to? This is a decal. Does a decal only refer to a date palm? Because
that's a good
I can
question.
imagine a coconut killing someone.
Yeah. Did they have coconuts? Were they aware of coconuts?
I don't know if coconuts were in the Middle East.
Yeah, I don't know. But in any event, the bottom line is that it's, of course, only a theoretical question. This was not discussed in connection with a specific case. And it obviously could refer to a coconut tree, to that kind of palm tree. But in any event, so Pshita, again, it seems obvious that the halacha would be the same because we just showed how it's analogous. So Ma'ud no, it's not necessarily, because Ma'ud what you might have thought, that this is like an indirect force. It's the force of the force. So, and what do I mean by that? Meaning that unlike when you hit the wood with your axe, it is the direct force of that axe hitting the wood that is then immediately causing the piece of wood, the chip of wood, to fly off. Whereas here, one can imagine it as sort of two separate things. One is, imagine a large group of dates. I don't know whether they come in date groups, but in any event, a large bunch of dates that are hanging just barely on the tree. And you hit the tree, and then as a result, all the dates fall down and they fall a long distance and land on somebody's head and they kill the person. So I might have thought that because it is not a direct result of the original force, but rather sort of like the separate separate gravitational force, that you're just disconnecting it. So I might have thought that would be sufficiently indirect that it would be considered a secondary force, a koach kocho, rather than a primary force. And so the Kamash Milan, according to Rebbe, he still considers that a primary force. So Ela koach kocho Rebbe hechi mishkachasla. So what would be a secondary force according to Rebbe? So kigon dishtab pisa, where you throw something against the tree, umachya legarma, and then you hit a twig. V'azil garma umachya lechavasa, and now the twig hits the cluster and causes the atar tamre, and now the dates get dislodged. V'azil tamre v'katel, and now they go and kill somebody. So that would be the case of an indirect, because the point is that once you have sort of two intermediaries, so then it's not going to be your force. Your force goes through whatever you're throwing, punching, etc., on to the next item, and then into the where the target, that's going to be your force, but it's indirect if essentially it goes through a second intermediary. So that brings us to the next Mishnah, which continues the list of exile-worthy acts. So let's take a look. Hazorik Evan Lirishos Harabim, you throw a stone into Rishos Harabim, into a public thoroughfare, Vaharag, and it kills somebody, Hare Zeg Gola, the person gets exiled. Rabbi Eliezer ben Elazar, ben Yaakov Omer, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, Im Kishim Mishikish Mikisha Yatz Asa Ha'evan Miyado Hotzi Hala Es Rosho V'Kibla. If when the person throws, there isn't anybody there, and then somebody sticks their head out and ends up there, putter, then the person is going to be exempt. Not clear, but most likely Rabbi Eliezer is not coming to disagree with the Tanakama, but explain the Tanakama. Zorak es ha'evan l'chatzero v'harag. If you throw some stone in your own yard and it kills somebody, well, then it depends. Im yesh rishus l'nizak l'kanei, if the victim had permission to be there, gola, well, then you shouldn't have done that throwing because you need to know that somebody could come in. V'im lav ain't a gola. But if he did not have permission, well, then you were entitled to make that throw, and you won't go into golas. And obviously, you would be considered essentially anos in that situation. And the way we know this is because the Torah says that they are going into the forest. What's so special about the forest? Everybody's allowed to go into the forest. It doesn't belong to anybody. So too, when we're dealing with a place where somebody's getting killed, it must be a place where both the victim and the attacker have the right to be there. Yatzar chatzar balabayas. Well, that excludes the home, the yard of the thrower, of the homeowner. She'ein rishos l'nizak l'kanisham, because he has no permission to go in there. So as a result, that there would not be any golos in that case. Abba Shaul Omer, Abba Shaul says, Ma chatavas ha'etzim rishus. So another lesson that we can understand from the pasuk about chopping wood, that just as chopping wood is a optional item, you can do it or you cannot do it. It's not a required mitzvah to do. Av kol rishus. So too, anytime we're talking about somebody who's going to go to galus, it's got to be something that was optional to do. It can't be something that was a commandment to do. Yotza ha'av hamaka espino. That comes to exclude a father hitting a child in order to teach him, to help teach him. V'harav haroda es talmido, or a teacher doing the same to a student. Ushliach beistin, and similarly, it excludes an agent of Beis Din. And Rashi tells us, or Shliach Beis Din, last Rashi in the Mishnah, Hamalaka Arba'im L'chayev Malkus. If you're giving the 40 lashes or 39 lashes to somebody who's obligated to receive them, so then that's an agent of the court, and you're doing a mitzvah when in applying the lashes, and as a result, you're not going to be liable for for exile, even if you kill the person by accident. Okay, so now we're going to the Gemara attempts to understand the first
So
case.
that would apply to a case of a guna, right? With the basically with the Rambam said, the Rambam from the Gemara.
One who refuses to give a get. Yes, if the court gives permission to apply the force, so then yes, that's exactly right. Now, of course, today we don't apply that force, so it's a result. It's not wouldn't apply to that situation, but you're absolutely right that one can imagine it applying in that situation. That could be another example of a shliach based thing. So l'rishus harab. So first, let's understand the first case of you throw something into the public thoroughfare and it kills somebody. So first, we try to understand, why isn't this an intentional killing? L'rishus harabim, you throw it into the public thoroughfare, mazidhu, you're killing on purpose. So Amar of Shmuel bar Yitzchak bisoser es koslo. We're dealing with somebody who's taking down his wall. And so then, as a result of taking down his wall, a piece of it falls. And so as a result, and then somebody gets killed due to that. So Ibaile ayune. Well, 1 second. If you're taking down, I mean, you imagine the demolishing of a building, right? If you're taking down a building, you need to make sure you place the dynamite in the right places so that the building collapses in on itself and doesn't fall on somebody that gets in the way. So that's on you, the taker down of the wall. So Bisoser Koslo Balayla. No, so the person was taking down his wall at night, and so as a result, there was no reason for anybody to be there. Well, Balayla Nami, Ibayle La Yune. There's no reason you can't check at night. Turn on, light a fire, check out to make sure that there's nobody there, and then take down the wall. No, Bisoser as Koslo La Ashba. He's dismantling the wall next to a trash can pile, a dump. And so as a result, there's not anybody that's expected to be there. Well, 1 second. Well, what kind of dump are we talking about? If it's one that people are often there, but then posheyahu, then he's being negligent because he should have checked because people are there. And if people don't happen to go into that dump because it's a dump, well, anasu. Well, then it should be totally unforeseeable. And why should he go to Gullus? So the bottom line is we're still confused as to why this person is going to end up in Gullus. So Amar Rav Papa offers a new answer that suggests why this is a situation that you would go to Gullus. So lo tzricha el ashba ha'asuya lipanos balayla. We're dealing with somebody, and now and we can say that we're talking about somebody who's throwing something rather than somebody who is. In fact, we'll take a look at Tosos in a moment, but. So we can deal with somebody who's where there's a trash pile that's going, the things are going into. And it's a trash pile where people don't go to relieve themselves during the daytime because it's too much in open view, presumably. But every now and then there are people who come by to sit there during the day. Well, Poshea lo havi, he's not totally negligent because people don't usually come there. But onus nami lo havi, but he's also not a total onus because the mikre because occasionally people do come to sit there. So as Tosos says, but ashbaha asuya, take a look at the Tosos 1, 2, 3, 4th Tosos on the page. Vahashta Myri Biyom, we're talking about a situation where you throw it during the day, ubizorik la ashpa, and you're throwing something into the trash and it hits somebody. And we don't have to be talking about taking down a wall any longer. We can go back to this case of our Mishnah where it's a little bit easier to understand it as throwing something, because that was how we said it in the Mishnah, right? We said hazorek even l'rishus harabim. So v'im tomar v'linkot be'ena asuya lifnos klal gam b'layla. Why not say that even at nighttime this is not a place that is used as a bathroom, and that people aren't there generally, but occasionally somebody goes by? Because Ika de Mikre that both at night and during the daytime, it's a place that some people occasionally go to, but don't go there all the time. Just like it is now, meaning just like during the daytime. So why make the special exception? After all, the person is throwing the stone during the daytime to the ashba, and why make the special exception of saying that people use it at night? So v'yesh lomar de'im kain anasu, that if in fact, whether it's daytime or nighttime, people are not usually there, and it's only the occasional person that's there, in that situation, that would be considered an anus. That would be considered beyond the person's control. Because then, if it's so rare, it would never come to somebody's mind, who demikre the Yosef, that somebody would come and sit there. Kevan she'ena asuya lifnos klal, because people don't use it as a urinal at all. So aval hashta ba'asuya lifnos balayla. But now that it's used as a urinal at night, isleila asuke gambiyom. So now he has to be concerned even during the daytime. Yes, it's not used that frequently during the daytime, but because it's used at night on a regular basis, he needs to make sure that we have to be careful that there's nobody there that is there, happens to be there, and is sitting by. So that is Tosos's explanation of that case, and so that explains why in the first case we're not going to consider it as murder. So now the Gemara quotes.
How do we discuss? I'm thinking the case of if we provide enough guardrails, what would be the situation? For example, the people are not demolishing a building, but they're fixing the building, and they put scaffolding up. And you see this all over the city. And yet they put up guards, they put up what do you call, wire mesh to prevent, and yet a stone still falls beyond that from the scaffolding. It falling on, let's say a person's injured or chas v'chalila killed. What's he set up Gedarim, but it wasn't sufficient.
So there are two aspects to it. So the question is whether if in fact somebody was doing the work and there's a direct force that's associated with it, well, then even if the person is not liable to go to gullus, he may be liable for damages. The more difficult question is if, in the preparation of doing the work, is something just the wind blows and it just falls and it's not something that would be expected. So then, that would be the cases that we saw in, back in the Bavas. And so, it depends on the situation. But here in that case, it would seem like if a person has set up the necessary precautions, then it may turn out that it's more of an onus than a shogeg situation. And in an ones situation, we're going to say that the person's not liable to go to gullus. So that, again, it seems like, given the facts that you've outlined, it seems very likely that that would be considered an onus and not a shogeg. So now the Gemara considers Rabbi Eliezer's rule.
Did you yesterday? I think I raised a question about the Goel El Dam. In an onus, is there still a?
So in an onus, there's definitely no Goel Adam. That I'm sure of. The question is the Karav Lamezid case, and I did not have a chance to check that out. I will, God willing, now I'm going to try and set myself a reminder, and hopefully I will try and remember to ask about the Goel Adam in a Karav Lamezid case. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says that when we talk about going to gullus, it's where the person's head was already visible, essentially, and not where a person suddenly put himself in the path of the projectile. So Tana Rabbanan umatza prat lemamtzi esatzmo. So the rabbi's explaining, Rabbi Eliezer said that the word umatza, right? We saw in the pasuk, right? The pasuk says. V'nashal habarzel min ha'etz umatza es rayehu, and it finds his friend. So the word find there is excluding somebody who causes himself to be found. So Mikana Amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov imishiyatzasaha eben miyado hotzi hala es rosho v'kibla pater. That's the basis for Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov's statement. So lememra de matzah mi'ikara mashma. So that implies that matzah is talking about something where you find something that already existed, meaning it was already present. But uraminu, one second, I can show you in a completely different context that the matzah means something different and means that you're finding something that you don't currently have and isn't currently available. Umatzah prat lamatzoi. This is a pasuk. Rashi says umatzah prat lamatzoi. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines beneath the Gemara reference in Rashi. It's about just below middle of the narrow lines of Rashi. Umatzah prat lamatzui b'mokar sadei achuzasa. We're dealing with a situation where somebody is selling their property that they've inherited. It's their property. It's their ancestral land. So ksiv v'hesiga yado umatzah. And then what happens? the Torah tells us that then the person who sold the property finds his hand is able to reach, and he finds the funds necessary to redeem the property. And we say that we allow the person to redeem the property, to redeem that asset. And so as a result, where do we not allow the person to redeem it? So the Gemara says, Prat lematsui, that comes to continuing on in Rashi. It excludes a situation where the person already had the money. What do we mean by that? Im haisa geula zu. If this redeemer had mitsuya biyado, had in his hand kishemachra, when he sold the field, well then ein kofan es lokeach lahachzira lo liftos. We don't force the buyer to then sell it back to the seller, because the seller had other assets which he could have sold, and he chose to sell his ancestral land, so we're not going to allow him to just buy it back. Because we don't want the person to sell, to sell that, that he can't sell a more distant field and then redeem a closer one, or sell an inferior one and redeem a superior one. We don't want him to basically use other property that he has in order to buy back property that he sells. So Amarava Hacha Mi'inyane Dikra. So 1 second, you have to look at the nature of the pasuk that we're talking about. In both cases, you have to look at the nature of the pasuk and what we're talking about. Because over there in the context of redeeming the field, when we say the word he finds, then it means like he acquires his hand as being able to reach, meaning that he gets the ability. Just as acquiring the means implies that he's from this point forward, it does not mean that he already had the means. So too, when he finds, it means from this point forward. And here, in the connection with wood chopping, if we take a look at the nature of the pasuk, umatza dumya diyar, the finding is similar to the forest. Ma'yar midi de'isei b'ikara, just as the forest already exists. Afumatza nami midi de'isei b'ikara. So too, the finding implies that the item was there even before the accident occurred. Okay, so that concludes our discussion of Rabbi Eliezer, and now the Gemara considers the final section of the Mishnah, which exempts those who kill while performing a mitzvah.
Before I go on, I just realized there may be a perverse incentive that's not intended. If I'm going to sell a piece of land, I'm going to be tempted to sell my ancestral property first, because I'm going to get it back at Yovel.
Yes, that's true. But, well, first of all, I had to double check. Hold on, let me just see. Hold on just a second. Yeah, so yes, you are going to get it at Yovel, but the point is that the right incentive is that if you're going to sell the property and you have other property there that exists at the time that you could have sold instead, well, then we want to give the buyer the assurance that it's not going to be redeemed until Yovel. So that actually, so to me, it gives the proper incentives. Maybe go ahead and maybe you didn't quite finish your point.
Oh, well, yeah. So they're trying to it seems unusual that anybody would ever be encouraged to sell ancestral property.
Well, it depends on how long you need the money for. If you need the money until Yovel, well, then you should sell your ancestral property because you'll get it back and everything works out great. But if, on the other hand, you have other properties and this is just a short-term cash flow issue, well, then you should not sell your ancestral land. We force you to sell other property because we want to make sure that the buyer of your ancestral land gets it for as long as possible.
Got it. Okay. Understand.
Okay. All right. So Hazorik as Ha'eben, but then again, although that's the next case in the Mishnah, it's really now going to focus on this case, the final case of discussing a mitzvah. So Amar Le'ahu Mirabanan Rava. So a rabbi asked Rava, Mimai de machatavas eitzim derishus, Dilma machatavas eitzim de sukkah, umachatavas eitzim de ma'aracha. Maybe, why are you telling me that you say that this is wood chopping is voluntary? Maybe it's actually all for a mitzvah. You're chopping the wood for a sukkah, you're chopping the wood for the Beis HaMikdash to put on the altar. And maybe the lesson that the Torah is trying to teach us is that even in a situation where you're doing it as a mitzvah, you're going to go to Galus. So Amar no. Rava says not that way. Kevan de imatza chatuv lav mitzvah. Since if it was already chopped, it would not be a mitzvah to it would not be a mitzvah to chop the wood any further because you already have chopped wood, so you don't need to chop the wood. So hashtinami lav mitzvah. So too, we're going to say that now is also not a mitzvah. So Eisvei Ravina Larova, 1 second, if you're telling me that just the theoretical possibility of not needing to do it turns something from a mitzvah into a reshus, Yatza ha'av hamakes beno. We have in our own Mishnah, we say that we exclude a father hitting his son. Rabba wrote as Talmido, Shliach Beistin. So Lema Kevan to Ilu Gamir Lav Mitzvah. Well, 1 second, if everybody did what they're supposed to do, meaning the son learned the way he's supposed to learn, the student learned the way he was supposed to learn, the sinner didn't sin, well then all of these hittings would be not a mitzvah. And so maybe we should call these also not a mitzvah. No, not true. Hasam afagav de gamir mitzvah. No, the truth is that at least with respect to the first two, the student and the son, it's a mitzvah to make sure that they go on the right direction, to provide that additional guidance, to give them a little patch on occasion. Now, of course, this was in those days. That was their philosophy. I don't think that that's true today, but in any event, Diksiv yaser bincha v'yenichecha. Chastise your son, and that will bring you rest. V'yitain ma'adanim not l'nafshecha, and he will bring delights to your soul. So the point is that if you give your child proper discipline when they're young, well then, when you are older, they will be there and be able to be helpful. So Hadar Amarava, Lav Milsa Hi de Amri. You know what? Ignore what I just said, because I have a better explanation. And in part, maybe it's because of the fact that one is we haven't really explained what about the last case of an agent of the court, because obviously if the person didn't do it, then it wouldn't be a mitzvah. And maybe he's not so comfortable with his comment about, even a good kid should be hit on occasion, because that doesn't seem to make too much sense either. But rather, let me explain to you why I believe that it must be that the case that we're dealing with is not a mitzvah when it comes to chopping the trees. V'asher yavo esre'ehu b'yar. The pasuk says that he comes with his fellow to the forest. What's the asher imply? De'ibai ayil v'ibai lo ayil. The implication of the asher is if, maybe, when, if he chooses to. That implies that he doesn't have to. Mitzvah, and if in fact he was coming to the forest for a mitzvah, would he be able to not go in? Of course he'd have to go in. So as a result, it must be that we're talking about there's not being a mitzvah. Well, 1 second. One second, you're telling me that asher means that if you want to, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But kol hega diksiv asher de'ibayihu. You telling me that every situation where it says asher in the Torah, it's a voluntary situation? Elamiyata. V'ish asher yitma v'lo yischata. What do we have? We have a situation where a person becomes tamei and he chooses not to purify himself and he enters the temple. So you're telling me, well, ibai mitame, ibai lo mitame. If he wants to become, if he wants, he can become tamei. If he doesn't want to, he doesn't become tamei. And so as a result, the asher there is indicating that only when you don't become tamei as a result of a mitzvah are you going to be get kares for entering the temple. Umeis mitzvah. Well, what about a meis mitzvah? That's a person who is performing a mitzvah and becoming tamei. So, are you telling me delo sagi delo mitame? Are you telling me that that because he had to become tamei, so hachinami de pater, that he would actually be exempt for entering the temple, entering the Beis Hamikdash in a state of tuma? Of course not. Of course, that's still prohibited. No, shiny hasam de amar kra. No, that case is different because the asher there is a little bit different. Because what did the pasuk say? The pasuk said tamei yihiyeh. He was going to be tamei from any source. So mikol makom, it doesn't make a difference. So the asher yitma, yes, if we only had asher yitma, you're absolutely right. We would end up learning that, in fact, if you were tamei because of a meis mitzvah, then you would not be subject to the penalty of kares for going into the Beis Hamikdash. But because the pasuk also says tamei yiyeh, it shows that it doesn't make a difference how you become tamei, and therefore, even if you become tamei as a result of a meis mitzvah, if you then go into the Beis Hamikdash, you would be still subject to kares. Hahumi baile, look at the Tanya. Well, in second, tamei yiyeh, we need that to teach a different lesson. Tamei yiyeh l'rabos tful yom. That teaches us that if a person goes to the mikvah and night has not yet fallen, so that person is still considered tamei for going into, if he goes into the Beis Hamikdash, even though technically he's already gone to the mikvah. So he doesn't even need to do anything more, and he will become tahor as soon as night falls, and yet we say that that's still considered tamei. And tumaso bo l'rabos mechusar kippurim, and the fact that it says tumaso bo tells us that even if somebody did go to the mikvah, if they also still need to bring a korban in order to finish their atonement, well, then they're not going to be considered tahor until that korban is brought, and that korban is generally brought the next day. And so as a result, that person is going to be tamei until that korban is brought. So Amar Le, so it can't be that we learn it from tamei yiyeh. So Rava explains, no, what I mean is ana mi'od ka'amina. I'm learning it from the word od. The pasuk says, right? Let me find the pasuk. The pasuk says, where is the word od? Do I put it in the? Right. In Bamidbar Yud Tet pasuk Yud Gimel. So that in that pasuk it says the word od, and so there we're going to still say that it's it says Kol Nogea B'Meis B'Nefesh Ha'Adam Asher Yamus V'Lo Yischata V'Lo Yischata as Mishkan Hashem Timei V'Nichrosa HaNefesh Hahi MiYisrael Kimei Nida Lo Zarak Alav Tamei Yeh Od Tumasovo. Ode Tumasovo. His tuma is still on him. So that ode comes to teach us that, in fact, it doesn't make a difference how he became tamei, even with a meis mitzvah. That's going to be a problem. Okay, so that was one possible version of a conversation where Rava explains to a rabbi who asks, how do you know that a certain case is not talking about a mitzvah? But the Gemara notes that ikadamaste law, there's another possibility of an exchange that could have happened with Rava, where they would, where again, it would result in Rava giving a similar answer. So b'charish v'katzir tishpos, the Torah tells us in a pasuk. This is Shmot Kaf Lamed Daled pasuk Kaf Aleph. It says, Sheishes Yamim Tavod, 6 days you should work, Uvayom Hashvi, and on the seventh day, Tishbos, you should rest. B'charish, both in the plowing, at the time of plowing, uva katsir, and at the time of reaping, tishbos, you should rest. So the question is how do we understand that the end of that pasuk of resting both at the time of plowing and at the time of reaping? So Rabbi Akiva says that this refers to the Shemitah year, and it doesn't need to tell us. We already know that in the seventh year you're not allowed to plow or reap. It already tells you don't sow and don't prune. So as a result, it can't be for that. But rather it's telling you don't do plowing even at the end of the seventh year, because it's going to help end of the sixth year rather, because it's going to help the seventh year. And when it comes to reaping, don't reap immediately after the end of the seventh year and think that you've gotten away with it, because even that growth that happened during the seventh year, you can't reap it immediately after the new year. So Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Yishmael disagrees. Rabbi Yishmael says no, macharish rishus, that we're talking about on Shabbos. And what is this teaching us about Shabbos? Just as the plowing is voluntary because plowing is never a mitzvah, af katsir rishus, so too the reaping that we say is prohibited on Shabbos is also only when it's voluntary. And what does that come to exclude? In a nice Daf Yomi coincidence, Yatza Katsir HaOmer Shehu Mitzvah, it comes to exclude the reaping of the Omer offering, that's the barley offering, that's offered on the second day of Pesach, and you're allowed to do that reaping even on Shabbos and Yontif as a result, in order to, on Shabbos, in order to be able to bring the Omer on that second day. So, so now that we're going to have that same question that gets asked. So one of the rabbis asked Rava, how do you know plowing is voluntary? Dilma Charisha is Omer, the mitzvah. Maybe it's the plowing of the Omer which should be considered a mitzvah. And yet the Torah still tells us to rest. So Amar Le, Kevan de imatza charosh eina choresh lav mitzvah. Since if you found a plowed field, you wouldn't have to plow another field. It's not considered a mitzvah. So Isve Ravina Larova, 1 second, Yatza Ha'ava es Beno. So then Ravina asks the same question that we saw earlier from our Mishnah. What about the father hitting his son? The Harava Rodas Tamido, and the teacher hitting his student. The Shliach Beis-Din, and the agent of court hitting the person who is liable for lashes. V'amai, why do they not go to Galus? Lema Kevan de Ilu Gomer Lav Mitzvah. If they did what they were supposed to do, it wouldn't be a mitzvah to do the hitting. Hashtanami Lav Mitzvah. So too, maybe we should say that this is also not a mitzvah, and so as a result, given the fact that he could have not needed the hitting, so as a result, we'll say it's also now not a mitzvah. So Hasam, Afal Gafta Gamir, Nami Mitzvah Kavid. No, because even if he did learn, the student would still need to be hit. Diksiv Yaser bin Chavi, right? Chastise your son and he'll bring you rest. Okay, so Hadar Amar Rava, Lab Milsa Hida Amri, and then Rava said, you know what? That's not a great answer. Katsira dumya decharisha. No, the point is that the reaping is similar to the plowing. Macharisha matzah charosh eino choresh. That when it comes to plowing, if he found the field already plowed, he doesn't have to plow another one. So av katsira nami. That so too when it comes to reaping. We can skip the words in parentheses, but the bottom line is that they effectively explain it. Matzah katzor ain't a kotzer, right? If you find the grain that's already reaped, it must be that you don't have to reap additional grain. But that's not true with respect to the mitzvah. Now, if you thought that we were talking about the Omer, well then matzah katzor ain't a kotzer. Are you telling me that if you found reaped grain, you wouldn't have to cut? No, it's not true. Mitzvah liktzor v'lahavi. The mitzvah of the Omer is that you need to actually reap that Omer offering and then bring it. So as a result, that's not going to, it must be that the entire pasuk about reaping and plowing is all about not a mitzvah. And so as a result, Shmuel's lesson, Rabbi Yishmael's lesson is a valid lesson. Okay. So now since our last Mishnah noted that a father is not exiled for disciplining a son, so the next Mishnah by noting that it's not a blanket exemption. And of course, our Gemara will begin by saying, one second, I thought we said the exact opposite. So ha'av gola al yedei ben, a father could be exiled for killing his son, ben gola al yedei av, and a son could be exiled for killing his father, hakol golan al yedei Yisrael, and everyone, and we're going to see the Rashi explains that we're going to mefarish b'gemara le'isuyemai. What does everyone mean? Everyone can be exiled as a result of killing Yisrael, and Yisrael golan al yedei hen, and a Yisrael can be exiled for killing them. Chutz meger toshav. The one exception is a ger toshav. The ger toshav ain't a gola el al yedei ger toshav. A ger toshav can only be exiled as a result of killing another ger toshav. So, like, we start with the first case, ha'av gola al yedei haben. So a father didn't, the Gemara begins by asking on the opening rule from our prior Mishnah. So ha'av gola al yedei haben, v'hamart yatsa ha'av hamak es beno. Didn't we just say that a father is excluded for hitting his son from getting galus? No, de gomer, we're dealing with a situation where he learned. Well, one second, v'hamrat afal gav de gomer mitzvah kavid, but even so, it's still a mitzvah. B'shulya de nagri. No, we're dealing with a situation where you're teaching your son an apprentice, a job. And so as a result, because that's our initial thought is that's not a mitzvah, and therefore, if you hit the son in that situation, you would go to galus. But one second, shulya denagre chiyusahu he lamde, but you're teaching him a livelihood, and so that is also a mitzvah. So the Gomer Amanusa Achriti. No, it's where he already knew another trade. And so as a result, if you're going to try to teach him another trade that after he already has one, so that's not sufficient. Ben gola al yedei av, and then we said his son is exiled as a result of killing his father. Or minhu, one second, maken nefesh. Prat lemake aviv. We have another brisa that says that when it comes to hitting a person, that comes to exclude liability for one who strikes his father. So two possible answers. So Amar Rav Kahana lo kasha ha Rabbi Shimon v'ha Rabbanan. One is a case of Rabbi Shimon, and the other case is a case of the rabbis. Le Rabbi Shimon da Amar Chenek Chamor Mesayif. Rabbi Shimon believes that strangulation is more severe than beheading, and so as a result, when it comes to a son who hits his father, he gets strangulation, and so as a result, according to Rabbi Shimon, because strangulation is more severe than beheading, if a son kills his father, he also gets strangulation. So shigiga sayev nitna l'chapara. But when it comes to regular murder, that gets beheading. And regular beheading, we enable somebody to get the atonement of exile. But shigigas chenek, but when it comes to an accidental situation where you kill somebody, where you would be chayev chenek if you did it intentionally, lo nitna l'chapara. What the Brisa is telling us is that in that situation, you don't get atonement. And so this Brisa is according to Rabbi Shimon. The Rabbanan, and according to the rabbis, that would be our Mishnah. The Amrei Sayev Chamor Mechenek. They believe that beheading is more severe than strangulation. And so as a result, if you kill your father if you hit your father, you do get strangulation. But if you kill your father, well, then you'll get beheading. So horig aviv b'shogig shigiga sayevhu. So as a result, if one were to kill their father by accident, it's the same. You're doing by accident a thing that would be ordinarily subject to beheading. V'shigiga sayev nitna l'kapara, and something that is subject to beheading is something that you can atone for through exile. And so as a result, that's explanation number one. Rava Amar. No, what we're going to do is we're going to say that it comes to exclude somebody who causes a wound for his father, b'shogeg. That the point is that when it says make ish, it doesn't mean that he kills the person, even though the translation here in Art Scroll says one who strikes a person dead. It's not referring to that. The point is that if you were to hit the father, prat lamake aviv, you would not get gullus. Why would you not get gullus? Meaning, why would you even think that somebody who hit his father by accident and wounded him would actually have to go to gullus? Because I might have thought Kevin de Bar Katala, who, since if he did the hitting of his father and causing a wound, he would be subject to the death penalty. Bishogeg nami legally. Maybe we would say that if he does it by accident, he'll also get, we'll also give him the exile, which you would get just like a regular person who does something bishogeg where he might otherwise get a death penalty. We do send that person to galus. So to this son, when he hits his father and accidentally and causes a wound, maybe we would send him to galus also. So Kamash Malan, the Bryce is coming to teach us that that's not in fact the case. All right. So we said Hakol Golan al Yadei Yisrael, that everybody is going to exile for killing Yisrael. So what is that? Who is that included? Although I had prepared to do this, and we're a little bit behind, but we'll pick up, God willing, from there tomorrow. And so stay tuned to learn what the all includes. Who is all inclusive of?
So with the father here, it only refers to a wound and not to killing him.
Sorry, you broke to and sorry, Ken, go ahead.
This last point we were talking about the father's only a chabura and not a ketila. Is that what we're saying?
So according to the answer that Rava is giving, when we had the brisa that says Maka Nefesh, Prat Lamaka Aviv, that the one who hits somebody excludes one who hits the father, that's talking about somebody who hits their father and causes a wound, that person, that son, will not go into exile. That pasuk Maka Nefesh is in the context. It's in Bamidbar Lamed Hey pasuk Tesvav, where it says Lanus Shama Kol Maka Nefesh Bishkaga, that the cities of refuge are a place where they're going to go to run to escape to if anybody who hits somebody accidentally. So the point is ordinarily that pasuk does mean murder, but we're going to say Prat Lamake Aviv, when it says one excluding one who strikes his father, it means Make Aviv and causes a chabura, but doesn't actually kill the father. And I might have thought that he would go to Gullus because, after all, if he did it on purpose, he would get killed. So maybe just like a regular murderer who kills on purpose gets killed and kills by accident goes to exile, here a son who hits his father and causes a wound on purpose gets killed. So too, maybe when he wounds his father by accident, he should get exiled. So no, the pasuk comes to exclude that.
So what is the penalty then for him?
There would potentially, potentially he would have to pay damages to his father for the damage he caused, but he wouldn't necessarily have any other, there wouldn't be any penalty associated with it because he did it b'shogi. He didn't do it on purpose. So there's not going to be any lashes or anything like that. He would just pay the monetary damages associated with the damage that he did.
So we're making a distinction between a chabura and not a maka katila. So if he were to kill the father by accident, he would go to galut, right? Galut.
Exactly. That's what our Mishnah said, right? The inconsistency was our Mishnah said a son who kills his father by accident goes to galus, and then we have this brisa that seems to look like it says that a father who kills his son, a son who kills his father, does not go to galus, is excluded from the pasuk of going to galus. So two ways of explaining it. One is that it's a machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis, and the second is that it's all according to the rabbis. And the point is that it's not talking of this. The brisa is not talking about killing, but it's talking about wounding.
Oh, and the first discussion is that it's a machlokas between Rabbi Shimon
and the rabbis, exactly. Rabbi Shimon says that chenek is chamor misayif, and therefore you would not get exiled because the son is doing a sin that is beyond the sin for which we exile somebody. It's too severe a sin, so therefore we're not going to allow him to go to exile. And the rabbis say, no, strangulation is more severe, and so as a result, the son is doing something that would get strangulation, and so as a result, he is able to go to exile.
But that's for Mazid, though.
Correct.
Well, that's shogeg.
No, that's Mazid. If you do it b'Mazid, you get strangulation, and therefore, if you do it b'Shogeg, we're going to send you into exile. Whereas the Rabbi Shimon says, no, if you kill your father b'Mazid, you get strangulation, and therefore, if you kill your father by accident, we can't send you to exile because you've done too big a sin. Even though you did it by accident, the sin that you would have done if you did it on purpose is too big, and therefore we're not going to allow you to go to exile.
So, so he wouldn't be able to go to exile, but he wouldn't be able to go to, but he wouldn't, but it's not amazing.
Correct.
So this is the question that.
So the question of
Anyway,
whether
so
or
the
not
question is whether the Goel Adam,
whether the Goel Adam is able to kill the guy. That's
him.
the question that I'm going to the person exactly.
I'm wondering who, in this case, if it's the son and the father, who's the Goel Adam? That's a good
all the relatives of the father. The
I
father.
guess, yeah, okay. Yeah, the relatives of the father. But the relatives of the father
are also the uncles of the son. So 100%.
They're also the relatives of the son.
Correct. So, all right, Yishakach, have a wonderful, wonderful day and good moed. Chagim Uzmanim L'Sason.